session. I wanted to jump in and say, in response to the chat, I've had several people say that they wish there was a moderator at every table. And I do wish that too, but unfortunately our staffing levels being what they are, we don't have a moderator for every table. So I would like to encourage you to please, oh, somebody told me they love my nail color. It's green. My son calls it my wicked witch nails. So thank you. So please, during the table chats, participate, put yourself out there, say some things, share some ideas, because that's what it is all about. Chris is volunteering to be a moderator. If you want to volunteer to be a moderator in the future, that would be fantastic. I would love that. So next year we will maybe think about doing that, because we are already talking about next year's symposium. So if you are interested, I'll put a little PSA in here. If you are interested in helping this go on next year, please contact one of us. We would love that. So our next session is called, what is it called, Jeanette? I can't remember.
Called Weeding, Love It or Hate It.
Okay, there we go. Weeding, Love It or Hate It.
Love It camp, but some of you will be in the Hate It camp. That's okay.
And the presenters for this session are me. I'm Leah Gregory with Illinois Heartland Library System. And I'm with my good friend Jeanette Durecki, who is the data analyst at the data specialist at Reaching Across Illinois Library System. I would also like to throw out there that we are the duo, along with our producer Ola Gronsky, who is behind Can't Shelve This, the library podcast. So if you have not listened to the podcast, Jeanette's going to drop that in the chat so you can listen to it. We talk about a bunch of different things. The first episode was just getting to know us. The second episode is going to be about advocacy, and we take suggestions. So if you have suggestions for future episodes, please let us know. But for now, I am going to share my screen, and we are going to talk about weeding. Can you see that? Is it a slideshow?
I can see it.
Okay, so weeding, love it or hate it. I love weeding. I don't know how anybody else feels about it. I cannot see the chat now, so
I'll help moderate the chat.
Okay, so if anybody has a chat, or Jessica and Dan, if they're here, they can jump in. They should.
Yeah, I can do it, y'all.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Jessica.
All right. Okay. So weeding. Do you want to take it away,
Yeah, sure. So first off, let's just talk about what is weeding. So weeding is the process of just determining what stays in your collection or what you need to remove, and there's a lot of different reasons for that. If you want to drop your own personal reasons for weeding in the chat, let us know. We would love to hear why you feel like weeding is important. But it's to free up space in your library. It's to save you time when you're looking for books and helping people find resources that they need to, conduct the work that they're doing. And just the overall appeal of your collection. So you're looking at the visual aesthetics of it, but also the variety. Nobody wants to think about if you were to walk into your library and you're greeted by overcrowded shelves. The first thing you think of is oh, there's a lot here. You might be overwhelmed by that. So you want to feel like it's visually appealing and people feel like it's a useful space, but also the variety. It needs to be easily visible on the shelf as far as people can tell, oh, you have a wide range of items for a specific topic, or even just, those of you who've talked about genrefying your libraries, when you walk into a space and you can clearly see that it's labeled, that's also appealing to users as well. Also, the reliability of the information in the collection. This is a big one. We talk a lot about the age of your collection. We're going to talk about it again in just a minute. But you really want to make sure that you are giving people information that's up to date and current, relevant. And we're going to go through all of that. The other thing I wanted to ask is, for those of you who are here, do you know if weeding is part of your library policies? Do you currently have a weeding policy in place so that if you were to win the lottery today and you couldn't come to school tomorrow, someone else could step in and they would know what you're doing and how to do it and how to make those decisions about the items in your collection? Let's also talk a little bit about the obstacles that you face. So there's a lot of challenges. One, just your own time, right? You have a lot of tasks you have to do in the library. You have to see students. You've got to help pull resources for teachers, work on collaboration, teach sessions. So where do you make time for weeding? And I do really encourage you to make sure that you are carving out that time in your own calendars, whether it's a time block that you schedule each week, and maybe you move it from day to day, depending on how much time you're in the library, but make sure that you leave yourself time for these types of tasks, because it's very easy for your collection to kind of get unruly without, you really even noticing. There's cost is also an obstacle. So if you're talking about removing items from your collection, can you afford to replace them, right? There's a cost factor for that. None of this is free, and no one assumes that the resources are just going to magically appear. There's also staff resistance. And sometimes it's, that comes from the most unlikely place, right? Sometimes you'll have an administrator who has a beloved book and they're like, you can't get rid of that. And so then you have to be able to explain why it's no longer relevant or why it's not a valuable part of your collection. I know I am a very emotional and nostalgic reader. I go back to those old favorites all the time. So it's hard for me to part with books. So I think that does also carry over into weeding. Unless someone tells me like, it's got to go for this reason, then I'm more reluctant to try to hang on to it. You also, sometimes we talked about this a little bit earlier with intellectual freedom, the reactions of others. And there's a fear of, having the wrong books or people challenging a book, and that you might decide to get rid of something or keep something based on those fears as well. Leah, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
The only thing that I want to add is I saw somebody say like, I feel guilty when I weed and my budget is small. So when I weed, I'm taking books off the shelf. But I want to stress that no books are better than the wrong books, because if you have a book that is really outdated and giving information or is otherwise not going to be helpful to your collection, to not have a book on the shelf at all and just help them find that information elsewhere.
Yeah, because it's really hard to kind of course correct once the wrong information is out there. We were just having a chat earlier about health information and how quickly the medical field changes. And so you really have to stay on top of those types of books in your collection, because it's easy for them to become outdated. There's the slide that you see here has a couple of different factors to consider. The age of your collection and non-circulating materials. Those are two areas that data can help you, like your reports in your library can help you make decisions about those things. The others are the perspective of the material, the relevance, and then the condition of the material. And we're going to talk a little bit more about those. Some things you might consider with regard to perspective are social justice issues, the way that changes over time, whether the material is offensive or considered appropriate for your audience. There have been a lot of great discussions about that kind of perspective already that I've seen in the chat, which have been really great. That also ties to relevance, but then the condition of the materials, we're going to talk about that a little bit more now.
Okay, I'm going to advance my slide, I hope. Hold on.
There we go. Yeah.
Okay.
So let's talk about some strategies to help you make weeding decisions. The first one is called CREW, and you can see weeding is actually just one part of this method. Is anybody currently using this? If you want to drop like a thumbs up in the chat, if you currently use this type of approach to weeding your collection, it provides guidelines about how to evaluate the collection, to determine what needs to go, and maybe even in a different approach to decide what should probably stay. One thing I want to be sure to mention here is that this applies to both print and ebooks. I think we have a tendency for digital collections to just be like, hey, I have it. It doesn't take up any physical space. What's the harm in keeping it? But you want to make sure you're weeding those in the same way with the same rigor and using the same evaluation system that you would physical books, obviously minus the physical attributes that we're about to discuss.
I saw a question in the chat with World Book Encyclopedia. If it's outdated, I'm sorry, you have to throw it away. There's no other way to get rid of it. And if it's outdated, you don't want it on your shelf.
And we'll talk a little bit about this too. Like there are some books or some collections that have supersession that is a factor. So if you have something that has an addendum, you want to be sure you're not throwing out the earlier part of that series, because then you only really have this one little chunk that's not really the complete work. So that's an important kind of distinction to make with regard to those types of serials.
Someone also asked what type of nonfiction material should be updated first, countries, presidents?
That's a good question. And we were just talking about, we're going to talk more about that in a minute, but you can kind of set your tolerance for your age of your collection in your different sections of nonfiction. So obviously science and things like that should be updated more frequently, and they should be newer books because we're discovering things all the time. Things like your nonfiction poetry section, they can be years and years and years old, and it doesn't really change. I mean, classic poetry is classic poetry. So
right. And so it starts to, like, when you're talking about age of collection is one of the metrics we were talking about just a second ago. When you look at it for your Dewey classifications, like, it's going to be skewed a little bit. Like like your science and technology needs to be a lot more current than maybe your literature does, because those classic works are classic works. No one's going to, reanimate and write a new version of something that was written in the 1900s or even prior to that. So it's, those works will always stand with the original publication date, and you'll keep them in your collection because they're valued for what they bring to that field.
okay, I'm going to go ahead and switch to our next method.
All right.
Which is called Musty. This is my favorite one.
So I really love this one too, only because like a lot of the work, I'm a data analyst, so I like anything where you have quantifiable, measurable amounts or classifications and categories you can put things in. This looks at a lot of different criteria and helps you identify what needs to be removed. So the Musty guidelines have three main components: the maximum age of the item that you're willing to endure, or how old you will let the item get before you want to get rid of it; the maximum time that item has without activity, so the amount of time it's going to sit on your shelf and not circulate; and then the musty elements are the things you see in the blue box here, whether it's misleading, ugly, superseded, trivial, irrelevant, or if it's available elsewhere. So you want to sometimes in your records, in your ILS, you can add this as one of the notes about that item. The maximum age of the item is really talking about how old you want your copy to get. So it could really, I guess in your particular case, it could apply to that, or it could apply to the overall age. Like, we don't want to keep health information older than 10 years or something like that. But in this case, I interpret it to be the age of the item that I purchased. So for instance, if I purchased something last year that was actually published in 2020, that item is technically 4 years old, but my copy is only, 1 year old. So in here, I would know that it's 1 year old. Maybe I only want to keep it until it's 5. I mean, we all know kids are hard on books, right? Like, and the things that get used over and over and over won't last as long. You heard Monica, I think, talk earlier about the paperback copies from, different programs. And it's like, those get beat up super fast when kids use them. So you want to make sure that you're honest with yourself about how long you think you could keep something when it's still in a usable format. The maximum time without activity, it's if something's not circulating in your library, it's taking up shelf space. And could that be used by something that is going to get more use? That's a question you have to ask yourself, and then start to think about, what are the considerations for what it would take to replace that? What's the cost to replace it? Is there another item that could serve the same function that kids would find more appropriate or more appealing? And then the musty element would be one of those boxes there, which would say, like, this is a reason why I'm going to get rid of it. Anything you want to add to that, Leah?
I agree completely. I'm looking at the chat while you talk.
Oh, okay.
So we can talk more about some of these questions, like in another session. We're going to have a session at the end that's kind of like questions that you have about the day. So I'm not going to address all of these. Somebody did say, though, not being afraid to throw things out that have harmful language. And then, so how do you square that with censorship? To make sure that you understand that weeding is not censorship. If you are taking it off the shelf, you have a reason that falls within your collection development policy that is taking it off the shelf. You're not just taking it off because you don't like it or you don't agree with it or somebody has complained about it. Weeding is based on, things that the overall society has decided we are not going to promote anymore, like hate speech and things like that.
Yeah,
So,
there's a lot of discussion about librarians, and I think and their role in that type of censorship that we were worried about. But if you think about the inherent purpose, or one of the inherent jobs of a librarian, is to curate the collection. You're trying to find the materials that are best and most suitable for your audience. So this is all part of that. And I think that's where using one of these approaches to weeding, it's not just that, hey, I don't like this book anymore, so I'm going to get rid of it. You have an actual reason. This book is, I always want to use ugly, because I'm like, if it's all beat up and mangled, you're like, it's ugly, you need to get rid of it. It doesn't look good in your collection. It goes back to, again, what Monica said earlier about kids walk into the library, and if you're giving them like a premium, like top quality product to take home and to use, there is some pride in that. So they feel valued in that way. So I think that's an important one to really consider. But are you ready to move on to the next one? Because we've talked about what you're going to get rid of, or reasons to get rid of items. Let's talk about why you would keep them. This is called the Fresh Approach, and this is from Library Girl, Jennifer Lagarde. And it talks about like the 5 points that you see here. Does it foster a love of reading? Does it reflect? I'm sorry, my copy is too small for me to read the rest of that.
reflect your diverse population.
There you go.
Does it reflect an equitable global view? Does it support the curriculum?
Right.
And is it high quality? And these go back to the same things that Monica told us about in collection development for schools.
Right. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that assist, Leah. Sorry, my eyesight is not what it used to be. But the other point, the 4 points that are listed to the left, are some things that you also want to think about, though, when you're talking about what to keep and what to get rid of. These are the kind of the exception areas that you want to keep in mind. If something is about your local history, you might choose to keep that even if it's not circulating. If you have works that are by local authors or set in local areas, and then series that have special merit. So sometimes, it's just because something's award-winning doesn't automatically make every student in your school want to read it, but you might want to keep those for that one time when you need to talk about it, or it's relevant and useful to a specific course or curriculum objective. And so you'll hold on to those even though that circulation might not be very high.
My family accuses me of this too. Like, I throw away things I should probably keep. So this is an important part of the weeding process that I have to pay special attention to. Like, remember, just because I want to get rid of it doesn't mean there's not a good reason to keep it. So.
And I think, just like bottom line, don't get rid of things just for the sake of getting rid of them, right? Like, if you don't have any shelf space, that's one thing. But if you're just getting rid of something because you just don't feel like you want to have it in your collection, like, really think hard about why you feel that way, and try to come up with another reason to remove that item.
Okay, moving ahead, we are going to talk about using library reports for weeding, because Jeanette and I both love to talk about data and how to use it. So this is one of my favorite ways that I used to analyze how to weed and what to weed. And I would use the title-wise analysis that is embedded in the Follett Title Wave website. Give me a thumbs up in the chat. You should see a thumbs up icon at the bottom if you have used title-wise. Has anybody used it? Tammy says she's the opposite. She wants to keep everything. Okay, so if you have not used title-wise, I strongly suggest that you use it. Because it takes your entire collection. We're having trouble, Jenna, apparently, with like the screens are not advancing. Like, I see weeding using title-wise reports, and some people are not.
That's what I see as well.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm going to drop my video out and see if that helps overall, just with the connectivity.
Okay, so try try refreshing your page and that might bring you back. If you are in Firefox, I've heard that you might want to use a different one. So TitleWise is a way for you to export your entire collection and then upload it to their site. And then they analyze it by your collection size, your average age, the number of items per student, print versus digital, almost every breakdown that you can think of. And the good news is you do not have to be a Follett user to use the TitleWise analysis. If you have a different library information system, you can export your collection. It's basically exporting the MARC records and then uploading them. And we're going to talk about some pros and cons of this. Okay, so for Follett users, it's very easy to export your collection. You're going to go to your back office tab, export it, and then save it down somewhere. Usually they'll save it down to like your desktop or something like that. You'll have to create an account at titlewave.com. You navigate to the collection development section. And then the important thing is that when you are asking them to analyze your collection, you have to set the parameters for collection. So as we talked about, when I'm setting up my parameters, I want my health and science in general to be very new. So I want the average age for that to be less than 5 years old. For my fiction or my literary fiction or I'm not nearly as concerned about how old. You also want to tell it like, I want 50% fiction, 50% nonfiction, or you want to collect more nonfiction, or you want to collect less nonfiction. So you can tell it some parameters. Anything to add about that? I could talk about Follett forever because that's the one that I used.
No. Like let's go through for the non-Follett users, because I think that's
Okay.
also important, because this is a great report and you don't have to be a Follett user to utilize it.
Okay, so basically you have to export your MARC records. I do know that if you are a consortium member in Southern Illinois in the Illinois Heartland Library System, you can get your collection through Polaris, but you do have to ask us for it. So if you want to do this, just let me know and I can have them export your collection for you. I'm 100% sure on other consortiums and the other LIS systems how to get that, but I would look for that or ask for that. But once you have it exported, it's exactly the same. You go to TitleWave, create an account, go to the collection development, and upload your collection to TitleWise, and be sure to change your parameters to suit your collection. Somebody's asking the recommendations for fiction versus nonfiction. It kind of depends on your school and what you're trying to achieve. Jeanette's answering that in the screen, so I can go on to the next one. So this is kind of what it looks like. It's multiple pages long, but this is the first one. And we blocked out the school that this is from because we don't want to call anybody out. But you can see that they've analyzed that, there's 11,000 items. The average age is 2010. This particular school did not set a goal age. They have 22.5 items per student, so that's pretty good based on their enrollment. And then they break it down quite a bit.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and jump in and say for this particular metric, there is a recommended range of 15 to 20 items per student. So I know a lot of times people are looking for goals, for what target should I be trying to hit? And that's a range that you want to try to achieve.
Okay. Answering chat problems. We're having a lot of, I don't know what it is after lunch. I guess the browsers are not feeling like coming back. So TitleWise is amazing and it's great. There are some limitations to it. So we're going to talk about that next, I believe.
I think we're going to go through the rest of the report first. We'll let you see all the sections, and then we can kind of get into we have a little bit of time left for pros and cons. Just to kind of give you a quick, it breaks down your nonfiction by the subcategory. Anything that is blue in this report is a hyperlink. So you would be able to click it to get more information about that area. And if you want to keep going, Leah, we'll go ahead and kind of advance through this to get to the next little section.
I just want to say, I love this little section right here where it says your age titles are 36% of your collection. So depending on your parameters, you might want to look at that.
Yeah, anything that shows up in red is something that they're trying to draw your attention to that you might want to resolve in some way. Okay. There are some extra tools on the Follett website to help you do things like kind of set up the social emotional learning categories and to know how to make sure your items are classified according or correctly for diversity scoring as well. So you want to pay attention to those. Those are some real like hot button issues, especially considering intellectual freedom and wanting to make sure that your collection is more diversified. You want to make sure it's easy to say you're going to import records straight from the publisher or for whoever you purchase your books from, but some of those we've been told are also categorized incorrectly. So you want to just kind of do a quick double check, and if it doesn't look like you think it should, then you might want to kind of look into what's going on there.
Allison, there's not a recommended age. There's no place that I've ever seen that tells you exactly how old something should be. But if you have questions, you can reach out to your system for guidance or for other librarians who may have a little bit more experience with this kind, because you kind of just get a feel for it. Like, obviously, we talked about science. Social science is something that changes. Like, religion doesn't change quite so much, but issues in religion change quite frequently. So it's just a constant balancing act of trying to decide what your parameters for age should be.
Well, and to make sure that it still aligns with the curriculum objectives that you have, right? So if your curriculum is not advanced to teach something that is very, very current as far as world news, you probably aren't going to find a lot of value in those resources outside of just interest of your students.
Okay, I'm going to move ahead because we're going to run out of time.
Yep. So this is just kind of talking about some of the data points that are important to know when you're talking about using library reports for weeding. You can look at circulation. Like, someone asked, like, how do you know how many copies of something to keep? And the challenge with this is the number of copies you need is not always going to be the same. So, like, think about, Diary of a Wimpy Kid is, like, I think Leah and mine, like, our favorite example of this, right? When that first book hits, you need like a gazillion copies, but over time, you probably don't need quite as many. So you're going to look at your circulation. You want to look at holds, like how many students are requesting this item. You're looking at the publication date, the acquisition date, like when did I buy it versus, so the age of the item in your collection, the material history, is it damaged? Does it have a page missing? Those types of things too. But the last thing is something that I think Leah and I, it's our mantra, is bad data equals bad reports. So if you go back to TitleWise and you look at this and it doesn't look right, and there's not a high percentage of MARC records being matched, something is going wrong, and all of the data that you're going to pull out of your system is going to be misleading to you. It's not going to be accurate. And so bad data equals bad reports can equal bad decisions. It doesn't necessarily mean that's what's going to happen, but you really just want to be aware of that.
And the other thing that is important is if you are not using MARC records, professional MARC records, it might be pulling the data but not getting everything. So if you catalog your book, you don't remember to put in an acquisition date, or if you don't put in tags for diversity, that's not going to be analyzed. So that's just something to keep in mind.
Yeah. So just right here under the bell, we're going to talk about the things to consider.
I'm going to go ahead and pull them all.
Yeah, no, you're fine. The time range, the ability to drill down, and then less is more when you're looking at reports. So don't overwhelm yourself with a lot of data that you don't need. If you really are just looking for hold data, see if you can find a report that only gives you that. But you also, with regard to time range, you want to be able to look at things that can make historical comparisons. So if I look at an item that's not circulating this year, I also want to look at, did it circulate more last year? What about the year before that? You're looking for patterns over time to determine when it's time to get rid of an item and pull it from your collection. The ability to drill down through reports, like the TitleWise is a great example of that. It gives you high level information, but gives you the option to look for more detail if you want it. I don't know, Leah, take us home. We got like 1 minute left.
Okay, so basically, all that is to say that first of all, weeding is an important part of your job and you should be doing, and I know that's hard to do when you've got so many other things on your plate. The other thing, to avoid bias or weeding the wrong things, we strongly recommend that you do use data of some type to guide your weeding. I've known librarians who just weed purely by gut. They go through and pull all the dirty, ugly ones and anything that's not circulating. But there's things, you know, other things to consider. So I really like to boil it so that I am not just saying, oh, well, I hated this book as a kid, so I'm going to pull it out
I think
of
that's
here.
also helpful when people challenge that, right? Like, why is this in your collection, or why did you remove it? Because there is that concern over librarians being capable of censorship.
Yes, and if you do pull it with no good reason, then you might find yourself. So you can go back and say, well, this, you know, it hasn't circulated in 3 years. Our community is not interested in this topic. So it's always good to back up your decisions with.
Yeah, and Kelly made a great point in the chat that I want to share, that you need to find out from your administrators and your administration, like, what's the acceptable disposal policy. So, you know, where do the materials go? Once you decide they're not in your collection, you've got to decide where they're going to go next. So that's a whole nother part of your policy to consider. But thanks so much for all of your time. I appreciate being able to join you today. If you ever have questions or you need more information, feel free to contact either of us.
Yes, please contact us anytime. We love to talk about this. We take this on the road. We've done this many times for different places and different schools. So if you have any questions, we'd love to talk about it. And especially if you're in IHLS, and I'm sure this will be the same for Jeanette and Jessica and Dan in the Rails system. I love to weed and I'd love to answer questions about weeding. So call me anytime. We are going to break now for 15 minutes to take a little bio break, get a drink, go to the bathroom, anything you need. Then we will start up again at 1:30 and we will have another table talk. So please join a table talk at 1:30 and share some ideas. And then we start our next session at 2 and we will go straight through to the end. So thank you so much.